In the previous lecture, we created a diffuse light with our vertex fragment shader. Now we're going to add shadows. So in this scene, I've got Zombunny with the diffuse lighting vertex fragment shader that we created in the last lecture added. And I've got a plane which has a standard shader on it, so it's just default, which will accept shadows. And I've added a cube with a standard on it as well. And you can see that it projects shadows because they're already programmed to do that. But our diffuse shader that we've created doesn't yet project shadows. It's not something that will happen automatically, as you can see right now. So what we need to do is build in a shadow pass into our shader. So I've made this shader into a new one called VF Diffuse Shadows. And if we open that up and have a look, it's got exactly the same code that we ended up with in the last lecture for creating our diffuse lighting. Okay, and you can see that there. Now, the first pass, which is the drawing of the material with the lighting on it, is this pass here. So that's one draw call. Now, to create a shadow on something, you need to do another draw call. And we do that after the first pass. So after the first pass in here, we're going to add in this code for another pass. So this pass has a tag of light mode equals shadow caster. And that means that it's going to cast a shadow onto the objects that are around it based on where the light is projecting that shadow to. Most of what's in this code is extremely simple because Unity just is doing all of the work for you, just with a few keywords put in. So you've got your usual suspects at the top. You now have a pragma with multi-compile shadow caster in it to tell the compiler for the shaders that yes, I want to do shadows, and then we use Unity CG Inc. Then we've got our normal app data, our normal V2F. Oh, sorry, of course it's not normal. This is new. Okay, so our V2F in this case has no other thing in it except shadows, because this pass, all it's doing is taking the geometry from our model, so we need the position and the normals, and casting a shadow. So the output will be a shadow. So the app data is being transformed into this shadow caster via our vertex shader code. So in here, we create our normal output version of our V2F, and then inside we call transfer shadow caster normal offset and pass in that structure for Unity to fill it up with the details of what the shadow is going to look like from this. Now, basically what a shadow is, and you can't really tell from any of this, is it's not that dissimilar to the data you end up in your clip space because it's squashing your 3D scene into a plane, or in some cases wrapping it around something if it's rounded. But generally shadows are a flat thing on the surface of something. So instead of projecting something forward into the clipping space and making it flat for the screen, you're casting it backwards and making it flat on whatever it lands on. So the whole outside silhouette of your object is being projected onto all of these surfaces, and then basically where the extremes of those are, they're coloured in, and that's what a shadow is. So this here is creating your shadow data for you, and then the frag is spitting it out as far as the pixel colour is concerned for that particular pixel, or that eye in this case. And we use shadow caster fragment, so it's casting the fragment for this shadow in that pass. Now, once you've added that in, save it. Don't forget to put the end squiggly bracket for the pass in as well. Go back to Unity and you'll now see that Zombunny is casting a shadow. So the shadow is the responsibility of the shader that the object that is generating the shadow, not the thing that is accepting the shadow, although you do need code in the shader to accept shadows, but it's not going to automatically just pick up that there's other things around that it needs to make a shadow for. So this shadow you can see on the surface here is coming from our shader. And you can see that quite clearly. So if you go back into your code, go up to the first pass, which draws Zombunny. And what we're going to do is just comment that out. So make sure around the beginning and the end of the pass it's commented out. Save that, go back into Unity, and Zombunny disappears because it's only the second pass drawing the shadow. And there it is. Okay, so we know that that shadow belongs to this shader. It's coming from this shader. Right, let's go back into the code and put our pass back in. And now what we're going to do is modify the first pass to accept shadows. So currently you won't find any shadows on the surface of Zombunny because we haven't programmed it in. And unless you tell the shader to draw the shadows, it's not going to. Alright, to add in shadows or to receive shadows, I've already gone through and put the code in, so I'll go through and show you where the changes are. So this is the same VF diffuse shadows that we had before that we've now got 2 passes on. The accepting of shadows we do in the first pass. So to begin with, you're going to need to add a new pragma, which is this line here, which is a whole bunch of information about not including light maps, blah, 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 which it will then ignore things like light maps, direction light maps, dynamic light maps, and vertex light, so that you can accept a shadow or basically take over the shadow processing yourself. Now, then we've got a couple of new include files, which are these ones down here, lighting and auto light, that you need for the shadow functions. Moving along, the app data is still the same. V2F has changed, so it's now got this shadow coords 1 in it, which is going to calculate the coords for the shadows on your object. Now the other thing that has changed is vertex. This used to say vertex, it now says pos. And the reason it says pos is, just a little bit further down, this transfer shadow that takes that V2F structure is looking for something called pos. It won't accept vertex. So if you put vertex in there, you'll get an error from this line saying something about pos, which will make no sense at the time. So make sure that changes to pos. Now, wherever you were using the word vertex before with o.vertex, such as here, it needs to be .pos. So change those two things. This vertex here is fine because this is the vertex coming from your app data and it's still called vertex. Now, the other thing that's changed in here besides that pos is, of course, the addition of this function down here to transfer your shadows from world space into that structure that the fragment can then use. Now, working our way down into our frag, in here we calculate the shadow pixels themselves, which are going to be dark spots, and then we use the shadow and multiply that by our diffuse light that we had before to put it into the color. So the shadow is calculated with this shadow attenuation given the V2F structure that gets passed in, puts it into shadow, and then we use that as, I guess, well, it's a multiplier. So it will multiply the value of your diff and multiply that with the RGB from your texture, so that if the shadow is like 0 or something, it's going to give you a very dark patch on your object, which is what you want for a shadow. So once you've got all of that together, save it and go back into Unity. Now you'll want to pick up the cube and move it around, and you'll be able to see how it changes the pixel colors that are on Zombunny, whereas before it wouldn't do any of that. Alright, so that's how you put and include shadows with shadow casting, shadow receiving in with your diffuse vertex fragment shader.